There have been many allegations of sex trafficking made against Jeffrey Epstein, the billionaire sex offender who died in jail in 2019 as he was awaiting trial on these trafficking charges. There have also been allegations that a lot of famous people knew about his activities, and now there's an allegation that a very noteworthy person, Jamie Dimon, a head of a large bank, knew about his sex trafficking activities. Joining me to discuss this is managing editor of lawandcrime.com, Adam Klasfeld. He's also the host of the Objections podcast here at Law and Crime. Adam, welcome back to Sidebar. Thanks for coming on. Tell us how this allegation came to light that Jamie Dimon knew what Jeffrey Epstein was up to.
Well, this came to light just yesterday in a hearing in the Virgin Islands case against JPMorgan. Now, JPMorgan, since late last year, has been facing multiple lawsuits alleging that they essentially facilitated Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking scheme by being his bank of choice between 1998 to 2013. And what happened very recently in federal court in a 3.5 hour hearing was that a lawyer for the Virgin Islands government told a federal judge that they have emails suggesting that a transfer of money from Epstein was going to hold, quote unquote, pending Dimon review. She specified that that meant Jamie Dimon. And basically that said this, and what's even more noteworthy than the existence of this email is the date on it. It was August 2008. Now, why is that significant? Because in June 2008, Jeffrey Epstein pleaded guilty in Florida to soliciting prostitution of a minor. It was his first brush with law enforcement. It was the one that got him to become a convicted sex offender. And so a lot of this was known at just months earlier before Jamie Dimon was allegedly reviewing Jeffrey Epstein's account. So right now, there is a lot of scrutiny on Jamie Dimon. A federal judge signed off on a subpoena that will allow the Virgin Islands government to find out what he knew, when he knew it. And right now, it comes at a very interesting time because JPMorgan recently filed a third-party complaint. That is to say, they sued one of their former executives, Jess Staley. And essentially, they're trying to say this was anything that improper that happened with Jeffrey Epstein is because of this former executive, Jess Staley, who was their former senior executive. He later became a CEO of a big bank himself, of Barclays, stepped down because of his ties with Epstein. And they tried to essentially say it was his fault. And in that hearing yesterday, one of the things that the Virgin Islands lawyer said is that if Mr. Staley is a rogue employee, why isn't Jamie Dimon? So the basically what they're saying is clear that the knowledge of what Jeffrey Epstein was doing, in their view, went straight to the top.
What does Jamie Dimon have to say about this? He's a huge name. This is an explosive allegation that he was basically complicit in this. I mean, that's basically what they're saying. So, what does Jamie Dimon have to say about this, if anything?
Now, JPMorgan had released a legal brief basically denying that he had anything to do with it. They said Jamie Dimon didn't interact with Jeffrey Epstein's accounts during the time, and that this whole thing is just the Virgin Islands government's bid to generate headlines, that he's essentially a third party to it. A federal judge essentially rejected those arguments in ratifying the subpoena. They said the judge allowed the Virgin Islands government to subpoena Jamie Dimon on it. Why? What convinced him? That there might be something there, at least enough to allow the Virgin Islands government to subpoena the CEO of JPMorgan. We don't know. The judge didn't reveal any of his reasoning in his ruling. He just stamped the subpoena and allowed them to look. And maybe we'll find out more. But the tantalizing piece of information, and the one that came up in court and in their lawsuit, is this Dimon review that happened right after Jeffrey Epstein's Florida conviction. What he saw, what he reviewed when he was looking at this account and seeing whether there was something that should have sparked red flags under any sort of anti-money laundering or any sort of other regulations that may exist, is going to be a fierce subject of dispute as this lawsuit progresses.
Where do things stand with the criminal aspect of this? I've been kind of getting the feeling that the feds aren't done with this as far as the criminal aspect goes. They didn't hold a press conference after Ghislaine Maxwell's sentencing and things like that. So is there any criminal liability potentially here?
Well, right now, this is civil litigation. This lawsuit was brought by the Virgin Islands government in their regulatory capacity. We have the survivors bringing their own lawsuit. So I want to be absolutely clear with listeners, there are no criminal allegations against anyone in this particular case, and federal prosecutors have remained absolutely silent here. But we should also think back to how the criminal prosecutions started. One, with investigative journalism, but also investigative journalism based on revelations from civil lawsuits. So it has happened before. Could it happen again? Well, it depends on what is seen. In the case of Jess Staley, there's a lot of email correspondence that, again, no one at JPMorgan or formerly at JPMorgan has been accused of any criminal wrongdoing. But there is, in the case of Jess Staley, a lot of emails pouring out into the public sphere suggesting that he was visiting Jeffrey Epstein on his island while Jeffrey Epstein himself was in prison, that he was visiting the property without the host being there. And there has been now an explicit allegation accusing Jess Staley in particular of participating in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking scheme. We don't know the details of that, and perhaps more of that will be disclosed as the case proceeds. But again, to answer your question, Angenette, this is definitely at this moment a civil matter, and there have not been allegations to date of criminal wrongdoing.
Well, Adam, I know you'll keep a close eye on this. You're on top of everything Epstein at all times, and we look forward to learning more and seeing what unfolds in this proceeding.
Thank you very much, Angenette. Always a pleasure to come on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on again, Adam. We appreciate it. Adam Klasfeld, managing editor of Law&Crime.com and host of the Objections podcast here on Law & Crime. And that's it for this edition of Law & Crime Sidebar podcast. You can download and listen to Sidebar on Apple, Spotify, Google, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And of course, you can always watch it on Law & Crime's YouTube channel. I'm Angenette Levy, and we will see you next time.